Look up at the sky. You might see something that seems almost impossible, a massive cloud floating hundreds or even thousands of meters above you. But here's the strange part. Clouds are made of water, and water falls. So why doesn't an entire cloud simply fall out of the sky? What is actually keeping it up? The answer begins with something much smaller than a cloud. To understand it, we first need to understand what a cloud really is. When you look at a cloud, it may appear like one giant fluffy object floating in the atmosphere, but it isn't. A cloud is made of enormous numbers of tiny water droplets and sometimes tiny ice crystals suspended in the air. Each individual droplet is incredibly small, and because these droplets are so tiny, they don't fall through the air like a bucket of water would. Instead, something interesting happens. Gravity is constantly pulling those droplets downward, but at the same time, air around them is moving. Warm air can rise, and rising air can carry tiny water droplets upward. So there is a constant competition. Gravity pulls the droplets down. Moving air can push them upward. And when the droplets are extremely small, their downward falling speed can be incredibly slow. That's why a cloud can appear to hang in the sky for a long time. But this creates another question. If gravity is always pulling those droplets downward, why don't they eventually fall? In a way, they actually do. Cloud droplets are constantly moving downward, but they are also being carried and recycled by the moving air around them. Some droplets evaporate, others grow, some may be carried upward again. And when conditions are right, droplets can collide and combine with one another. Eventually, some of them become large enough that gravity starts winning the battle. They can no longer remain suspended by the surrounding air. And that's when something familiar happens. They fall as rain. So, rain isn't completely separate from the cloud. Rain can begin with the tiny droplets already inside the cloud. But there's another fascinating part of this story. Clouds themselves aren't fixed objects, they are constantly changing. Water is evaporating into the atmosphere. Water vapor is cooling and condensing. Tiny droplets are forming, growing, disappearing, and being carried by moving air. So the cloud you see above you isn't necessarily the same collection of water droplets a few minutes later. It is more like a constantly changing process. And that changes the way we should think about clouds. A cloud isn't really a giant piece of water sitting in the sky. It's a visible region of the atmosphere where countless tiny water droplets or ice crystals are suspended and continually moving. That's why a cloud can look solid from far away while being completely different at the microscopic level. And here's something even more surprising. The water inside a cloud doesn't necessarily stay there. A droplet can evaporate and become invisible water vapor. Later, that water vapor can condense again somewhere else. Some of the water eventually becomes large enough to fall as precipitation. So the cloud is part of a much larger cycle. Water moves between the Earth's surface, the atmosphere, clouds, and precipitation again and again. The next time you look up and see a huge cloud hanging in the sky, remember what you're actually seeing. Not a giant object floating above you, not a lake suspended in the atmosphere, but billions of tiny particles interacting with gravity, air movement, temperature, and water vapor. And when those tiny droplets become large enough, the sky finally lets them fall. So the next time rain begins falling from a cloud, you aren't watching a cloud collapse. You're watching the atmosphere transform tiny suspended droplets into something heavy enough for gravity to win. And that is why clouds don't simply fall from the sky.